Hello everyone, this is Roman Bogomazov, and I'm welcoming you to the second session of our discussion of Wyckoff method and how we can apply Wyckoff method on the Chinese market.
大家好，这里是罗蒙·博格马佐夫教授，欢迎大家收看这是魏科夫交易法的第二讲，在这讲里面我们在探讨一些新的内容。
With me today, and I'm very grateful for this, is my student Zhao Goban, and he will be, as usual, translating this session.
今天我的翻译仍然是赵国本先生，我的学生。
Today, we will be talking about distribution trading range, and we will cover the phases of the distribution. We also will talk about some of the Wyckoff events during the distribution trading range.
今天我们将探讨派发区间，而且要探讨派发区间的阶段和里面发生的事件。
We also will look at the charts, long-term charts and short-term charts of Shenzhen Composite.
我们也要看一下深证指数的长期曲线。
We are very grateful for all of you who have logged in for the first session, watched the recording, and found us on Youku, and contacted us. Thank you very much.
非常感谢大家观看我们第一期的视频，而且也非常感谢大家给我们很多建议。
All right, well, let's jump to the material, and let's start with this slide again.
让我们再回到这个交易区间的专业名词和缩写符号。
It's very important to understand some of the abbreviations that we have in Wyckoff method, because they identify specific events that the price and volume show us.
我们能够记住这些个专用名词的缩写非常重要，因为这些缩写都代表着魏科夫交易区间的事件的名称。
Some of the things that are also important are very thematical. For instance, an idea of the composite operator, which Wyckoff originated more than 100 years ago, refers to smart money, to big money, to institutional money. These are the market participants that absorb the supply of shares that is available, and therefore they create the big cyclical and secular trends in stocks.
这里的很多概念非常重要，比方说市场综合人这个 CO， 他呢是魏科夫100多年前提出的概念，它代表了聪明钱，代表了大基金，代表了机构操作者，是他们控制了最大的基金，而导致了整个市场的价格变化。
Our goal, as I mentioned in the previous recording, is just to follow the big money. We want to be the small fish that swims alongside the big one and enjoys the profits that we're taking from the movement of the trend.
我上节课谈到，我们的目的就是认识和跟踪这些个市场大机构、市场的大基金，我们就像小鱼跟着大鱼游一样，在这整个股市的运动中赚取我们的利润。
Another Wyckoff semantic, which is extremely important, and we will spend a lot of time talking about this, is a change of character. A change of character is usually a switch between one environment to another. For instance, if the stock was in the downtrend and then it experienced a selling climax, an automatic rally, that suggests to us that the change of character has happened, and now from the trending environment, we are switching to a non-trending environment.
另一个概念是非常重要，叫特性改变。这个经常是从一个趋势到另一个趋势的转折。比方说，我们看到一个股票，它在下跌过程中，但是我们发现它有抛售高潮，然后转到自动上涨的时候，我们就知道，那么这只股票可能从一个环境 转到另一个环境，也就是说它的特性发生了变化。
As a change of character has happened from a downtrend to the non-trending environment into the consolidation, a change of character will also occur at the end of the trading range, and it will signify a switch from a non-trending environment to either an uptrend or a continued downtrend.
在股市的下跌过程中，特性改变发生了以后，然后呢，股票就从下跌趋势转到一个水平的震荡趋势，而且呢，在这个震荡的交易区间的后期，那么这个可以从没有趋势的这个交易区间转向开始股票拉升，也是特性改变，这里也是特性改变。
We will talk about the change of character a lot, but we also will talk a lot about a stepping stone trading ranges. We usually look at accumulation and the distribution as the original places where the trend originates. Stepping stone trading ranges is something that will happen on the way up or on the way down in the trend. And it's a temporary stopping action that's just gonna reinforce the idea and the bias of either accumulation or a distribution.
我们也要谈到脚踏实的交易空间。一开始的时候，我们谈到的是趋势的改变，那是起始改变。比方说，从趋势的下降趋势到水平，然后到转折，这是趋势的起始改变。而脚踏实交易区间呢，它是在趋势发生完以后，中间的停顿以后趋势继续向前发展，这段区间叫做脚踏实交易区间。
Here on this simple schematic that I drew for you, we could see that the original accumulation has taken place at the lowest prices, and then as the price comes up, we have a stop in action, and we have an area where the price kind of stops and rests before it starts going up again. And we could have quite a few of these stepping stone ranges on the way up until the distribution actually takes place.
从这个示意图里面，我们看到这个吸筹阶段或者是积累阶段发生在最开始，然后呢出现了上涨，股票价格的上涨。在这个上涨以后呢，在中间会出现一些停止行为，就是终止行为。终止行为以后，那么就会出现脚踏实的交易区间，就出现再一个盘整期间，盘整完以后继续生长，然后再盘整，再生长，直到开始派发。
The same would happen after the distribution, after the original distribution. As the price goes down, there might be some kind of climactic action, which is the intermediate climax. And then the price will go into the consolidation before the next move to the downside. We would call this stepping stone trading range after the distribution a redistribution trading range, and we would call the range on the way up after the original accumulation a reaccumulation.
同样的事情发生也在派发的这个情况下发生，那么就是原始派发以后，股票的价格会下跌，而跌到一定程度的时候，就会出现一个阶段性的抛售高潮。阶段性的抛售高潮是一个终止行为，这个发生完以后，就会发现一段停顿或者盘整。这个盘整期间叫做再派发阶段，再派发区间，再派发完以后，出现了股票的这个价格继续下降。那么回到我们前面刚才说那个股票上涨阶段，这个上涨阶段它的脚踏实交易区间叫什么呢？叫做再吸筹区间，或者是再收集区间。
Usually at the places not only of their regional accumulation, this is where we would prefer to take a long-term position, which we would carry through the whole cycle of the marking up prices. Stepping stone ranges allow us to open a lot of the swing positions where we might recognize that the trend has been established and there is elements of leadership and there is some elements of the timing of when the price is going to leave this reaccumulation range and start advancing. Those are usually going to be the best swing trade positions for us that we could establish in the uptrend.
在这个股票上涨的在这个吸筹区间的时候，在末期基本上来说，我们建立的是长期头寸，也就是这个长期头寸，我们恐怕要拿住这个头寸，一直到派发阶段。那么在脚踏实的交易区间，在它的右边的时候，我们做的是波段，这点是做波段的进入点。那么基本上来说，我们会看出这个脚踏实交易区间后期的特点，然后介入，然后开始做波段。
Today specifically we'll talk about the distribution, and Chinese markets have had quite a few markups and quite a few markdowns, so we have a lot of case studies in the future to go through on the distribution as well as on accumulation.
今天呢，我们主讲派发。在中国的股票市场发生了许多的上涨，也发生了许多下跌，有很多吸筹阶段，也有很多派发阶段，所以说给我们很多的这个研究的例子。
Well, let's look at the schematic of the distribution.
让我们看一下派发区间的示意图。
And we will talk again about phases. We've mentioned that during the accumulation, the price is going to go through the construction of the trading range, and that construction of the consolidation will have specific characteristics. Those specific characteristics are going to belong to the specific phase, and each phase is going to have its own intention behind it.
在以前我们讲吸筹阶段的时候，这个随着股票的发展，它形成了一个区间，在每一个区间都有它不同的阶段和特点，在派发示意图中也同样。
Let's talk about phase A. And in a way, all of the intentions behind phases of the distribution are going to be somewhat similar to the intentions behind the phases in accumulation.
要么我们看到这个派发期间，它某些阶段它背后隐藏的一些目的，也就是各个阶段有不同的目的。而在派发期间的阶段 A 的时候，它的目的基本上和吸筹期间的阶段 A 的目的相似。
In accumulation, phase A would signify the stopping action of a downtrend. This is where we would experience a climactic action, a selling climax, a change of character as an automatic rally, and a secondary test to the climactic action.
在吸筹区间的时候，我们经历的是从下降阶段到一个盘整阶段的改变，我们经历了抛售高潮、自动上涨、二次测试。这个阶段主要是下跌行为或者下跌趋势的终止。
In the distribution, the elements are going to be the same. They're going to be the mirror image of the accumulation, and the intention is also going to be the same. The intention will be to stop the uptrend from moving further up, and even though we might have some higher highs even after the uptrend, we're still stopping the price from making significant advances beyond the climactic action.
派发期间它发生的行为几乎是吸筹区间的镜像，也就是反向。那么它其实做的也是一个上升趋势的终止。虽然我们可以在阶段 A 以后会发现有很多它出现了更高的点，比方说是二次测试的时候的高点，或者是在阶段 C 的高点，但总体来说，阶段 A 的终止行为终止了这个上升趋势的迅速上涨。
Phase A is going to have 4 elements to it. The first one is going to be a preliminary supply. This is where there is the first attempt to stop the price from further advance. And this preliminary supply will always fail as the price will go higher and will establish a buying climax.
阶段 A 呢有4个因素，这也就是最先开始出现的是初始供应。初始供应是第一个努力能够希望阻挡 或者是说不是说希望，就是阻挡了上涨的趋势，但是这个初始供应呢总是失败，所以说股价会继续上涨，然后出现抢购高潮。
Usually that failure to stop the price action from advancing further is going to result in the breakout. And after the breakout, we might experience what we're going to call a climactic run into the actual high of the buying climax.
也就是说，这个伴随着这个初始供应的失败，经常会有一个突破，也就是初始供应的顶部正好有一个小的区间，这个区间会造成突破，突破完以后呢，会有一个高潮上涨，也就是出现一个上涨高潮，直到抢购高潮这个点。
Such climactic run will be associated with increased velocity, increased spread, some gaps could occur at that time, and also increased volume signature.
这个上涨高潮阶段经常会有价差增大，有成交量增大，甚至会有向上跳空等等这种现象，还有一个上涨速度增加。
The increase in velocity, spread, and the occurrence of spreads is going to identify the excitement by weekends.
那么这个价格上涨速度和价差增大，我们可以从这里面可以看到这个脆弱的交易者，也就是说虚弱的交易者，他们的狂热。
The weak hands will be seeing this as an opportunity for the trend to continue, and they will enter this position, and they will suffer from the next reaction, a change of character reaction that's going to happen after the buying climax. Meanwhile, the increase in the volume signature is going to identify the increase of the supply, and usually that increase of the supply is going to be of institutional quality.
当这个上升速度和增加价差增大的时候，增宽的时候，那么这些脆弱的交易者，也就是说他们比较弱势的这个交易者的话，他们会认为那么这个上涨趋势会继续延续，那么他们就会在这点购买，而这些在高点购买的人，当出现了特性改变的时候，价格自动下跌的时候，他们就受罪了。那么这个时候呢，成交量增大的时候，它的表现为是机构派发的成交量。
Therefore, the preliminary supply and the climactic run could potentially exhibit the first signs of the distribution on the way up as the price still travels in the uptrend.
所以这个初始供应和上涨高潮可以看作是机构在上升过程中的派发。
The next element of the distribution could come on the automatic reaction. And automatic reaction is going to be also a part of the reaccumulation. So a very common question from our students is, how do we know whether this is a reaccumulation or a distribution?
那么第二个构成因素，这个派发的构成因素呢是自动下跌。这个自动下跌有的时候和再吸筹或者是再累积比较相似，所以很多同学都在问。那么这个自动下跌和再吸筹它的区别在哪里呢？
The answer to this question lies not only in phase A, where we could see some elements of the distribution, but also in the price and volume behavior in phase B, both at the support and the resistance level, also at the behavior of the price and volume around phase C, where the final test of the previous highs is going to take place, and also on the change of character out of the trading range. This is where the distribution qualities of the trading range is going to be most evident.
答案是 不只是在这个自动下跌阶段，而且在阶段 B 和阶段 C、阶段 D 整个这个吸筹区间，随着这个价格的不断演化，都会出现了一些个特点，让我们认清，让我们认识这是再吸筹呢，还是派发的自动下跌。那么在这个随着阶段的这个价格阶段的演化，我们可以看到，尤其是在阶段 C 这个派发后的上冲回落这个测试阶段，它测试的是阶段 B 和阶段 A 的这个需求量，尤其是阶段 C 和阶段 D， 它是整个派发区间里最明显的阶段，特征最明显的阶段。它也就是从这里面，我们能够更加清楚的看出来阶段 A 的时候，那是自动下跌呢，还是再次吸筹。
Our goal as retail traders is to be able to stay with the uptrend and to find the evidence of early distribution, whether it's a reaccumulation where the trading range is going to be created and we just don't want to participate in that trading range, or if it's a distribution specifically, we want to get out of this position somewhere in this area, as well as we want to establish a position to the downside in the area of the change of character where the trend is emerging and is confirming itself.
我们散户的目的其实是参与在这个上升阶段，整个上升阶段，然后到了初始供应和抢购高潮的阶段的时候，在出现特性改变的时候，我们不希望，我们就应该认识到这个阶段，然后我们出来，我们不希望继续再参与整个盘整的冗长阶段。如果它是再吸筹的话，那么我们希望在这里就开始得到终止，我们拿出利润来，然后看着这个股价的发展。如果它将来是派发的话，那么我们更希望在股价降低之前、下跌之前就出来。那么如果是派发的话，那么在它的阶段 C 和阶段 D， 也就是最明显的阶段，也许我们就开始准备空头了。
From this perspective, phase B for us is of no interest, but it gives us a lot of information as to the potential bias of the whole trading range and the information on the relationship between supply and demand, effort and the result.
也就是从这一点来讲，那么这个阶段 B 我们不希望参与，但是阶段 B 它也非常重要，就是因为它给我们提供了大量的信息，它给我们告诉我们哪些是这个供应和需求的平衡，它是整个将来股价变动的因素积累。
Phase B is also very interesting as the sentiment of market participants changes and there is a lot of disbalance between what traders think is going to happen next. Some of them think that the price is still going to go up and they hold on to the positions. Some of them are actually taking profits and think that the price is going to go down. So therefore, sometimes I call this phase B a zone of war between supply and demand, between buyers and sellers. And that type of fluctuation in price where we experience a lot of volatility usually builds up the cause for the next move.
这个阶段 B 呢，它也给我们提供了很多的其他的信息，比方说它这个表现为供应和需求的不平衡，有许多这个交易者呢认为股价会继续上涨，也许他们会在这购买。这个有许多交易者呢认为，股价即将下跌，所以说他们在会这儿做出很多卖出。所以说这个 phase B 就是这个阶段 B 这个阶段可以称为是它一个股价或交易者交战的阶段，就是接战的阶段。它表现了很多的这个，可以从这里面看出交易者很多的他的这个情绪的变化和市场情绪的变化。
Then phase C follows, and phase C intention is to be the final test at the levels of the resistance. What are we testing? We are testing the availability of good demand that could push the price above the previous high and sustain that movement by showing up as a bullish reaction And if it fails, then most likely there is some kind of change of character that is happening, and we should reconsider our bias.
阶段 B 以后就到阶段 C 了。这个阶段 C 呢，它做的是这整个交易区间的终极测试。它测试的是什么呢？测的是阶段 A 和阶段 B 的那些个需求还在这个价格水平上，这些需求还在不在？如果在的话，那么它有可能会再创一个新高。但是这个如果是需求被消耗光了以后，那么有可能它的特性就开始改变了，价格开始下跌。
Later on, we will study different variations of the distribution, different variations of the accumulation, and I will show you how, based on the levels of supply and the quality of the demand, the trading range, the formation of the trading range could take different shape.
以后我们会讲解派发区间的不同表现和吸筹区间的不同表现。根据供应和需求的不一样，那么呢，这个区间它也会表现有一些差异。我们以后再讲这些差异的详细的差异。
After the final test in phase C, where this test to continue the advance fails around this area right here, we are going to experience a change of character. This is where the reaction to the downside is going to become the largest reaction, and it's going to have different from the previous reactions characteristics of increased spread, increased volume signature, increased velocity, with which the price moves to the downside, and it's going to be followed by the subsequent rally that's also going to change in behavior from all of the rallies that we've seen in phases A and B. And this rally is going to be much weaker and is going to look different than anything that we've seen before. Both of them, the reaction to the downside and the rally, is going to produce a change of character from a non-trending environment, which is a trading range, to a downtrend.
经过了阶段 C 的终极测试以后，也就是我们发现这个需求不足以再支撑股价的继续上涨的时候，那么这个时候就发生了特性改变，然后价格开始下跌。而这个下跌呢，我们把它叫做特性改变，我们就会可以看到下跌的幅度会比以前任何的调整幅度都大。而且呢，这个幅度调整，这个下跌过程中会出现价差增大、成交量增大、下跌速度增大。而且我们在下跌的到底部支撑区的时候，会发生一个行为，叫做最后派发点的上升，也就是它最后弹回一点，形成最后派发点。而这个弹回的这个幅度也会出现和以前任何一次上涨的幅度不一样。那么这个弹回幅度会比以前任何的上涨幅度都小。也就是这个弹回的力度会越来越弱。
In a way, a change of character could be called an emergence of the trend and a confirmation of that trend. Both phase D and phase E have the same intention, is to mark down the price after the distribution has taken place, either through the trading range itself in phase D or out of the trading range in phase A.
那么这个特性改变呢，也可以说是一个趋势的产生和一个趋势的延续。那么这两个趋势，在这两个阶段呢，都会发生这个股价的下跌，要么就是在区间内，在调整区间内、交易区间内的下跌，这是 phase D， 或者是呢这阶段 D， 或者是在跌破了交易区间以后的继续下跌。这是阶段 E。
All right, well, let's look at some of the Wyckoff elements in the distribution. This is the slide that I usually give to all of my students that describe the characteristics of all of the Wyckoff events in the distribution range.
那么这张那个幻灯片呢，就给大家展示的是魏科夫派发区间的事件。在这是所有学生都学习的一张幻灯片。这张幻灯片讲解了所有派发事件的特点。
What I would like you to do for those of you who are going to seriously study Wyckoff method and you guys are going to try to apply Wyckoff method for your Chinese stocks, for the Chinese indices, is to print this out and to start going through these characteristics and to memorize the characteristics of each of the Wyckoff elements, because later on we're going to be talking a lot about these Wyckoff elements, and I will be using the semantics a lot in the labeling of the actual stocks and indices.
他建议如果大家认真学习魏科夫方法和将要应用魏科夫的话，那么我们需要把这张幻灯片打印出来，然后呢记熟各个事件的特点，因为以后在他分析 K 线图的时候，他会在每一个 K 线图上对这些事件进行标记。
In the next video, we'll show you the same description of Wyckoff events for accumulation, and we'll start going into more details for each of the Wyckoff events, what it means, where should it occur, which phase, and what kind of characteristics we need to observe in order for us to identify that specific event.
下个视频的时候，我们会展示吸筹区间的这些魏科夫事件和它每个事件的特点。
And for now, let's just jump into the current market. And today we're going to look at the long-term picture and short-term picture of Shenzhen Composite.
那么现在我们看一下深圳综合指数的长期图。
So a quite different picture from Shanghai Composite.
这张图呢和上海上证指数的周线图有点不一样。
As we see that the price in this area is not really rallying the same way as the Shanghai index, and the subsequent reaction actually comes much, much closer to the area of the support that was created by phase A.
大家可以看到，这个深证指数的周线图和上证指数的周线图有点不一样。大家如果记得的话，上证指数的周线图，它的在阶段 B 的上升比较明显，而深证的这个上升不太明显。深证指数的下跌，就在后面这个下跌阶段也跌进了前期的低点。
Again, I want to point your attention to different levels of volatility in different phases. Here in phase A, as the price still continues to go down and then subsequently retests the same low of the climactic action on the secondary test, we're seeing that the spread is big and increasing. We see some gaps, and even on the way to the downside to the test, we see how volatility still takes place, and these are going to be the elements of the phase A where volatility is going to be one of the highest in the whole trading range.
它在这里呢要特别提示到这些个下跌波动的特点。比方说在这个下跌阶段的时候，我们可以看到很多价差增大，甚至有跳空下跌这些特点。在看到这个二次测试的时候呢，它的特点，它的这个K线的图的这个价差呀，或者是它的移动速度啊，都和前期比较相像，这些都是阶段 A 的特性。
In comparison to this volatility in phase A, look at all of the reactions in phase B. What can you say about that? Well, we definitely seen that volatility has decreased, and this is going to be an element of phase B, regardless of whether this is an accumulation or a redistribution. In a lot of cases, phase B is just going to decrease that volatility as the sellers that were selling on the way down are no longer being sellers, and they just either stand on the sidelines or they might be just smaller size sellers, or even in some cases they could switch the buys and become some short-term buyers.
很多人把这个 volatility 翻译成振幅，也就是震动的幅度。那么我们大家看，在后面它的震动幅度或者是这种下降的特点啊，和阶段 A 的震动幅度和下降特点已经不太一样了。那么你看它画圈的这些部分，在这些部分里，很多原来在阶段 A 的卖出者，也就是卖家，他有可能现在不卖了，他有可能是 OK 什么也不做，他要观察一下这个市场情况怎么样。有一些个卖家甚至转化成买家，或者是他少卖一点，或者是变成买家了。
What's interesting about the latest action in 2018 is that volatility starts to increase. And usually that would be an element of either phase C in accumulation or an element of the major sign of weakness in the distribution.
非常有意思的是，在最后这次下跌，这个幅度，这个振幅非常大，而且是速度非常快。这个经常是什么呢？是在吸筹阶段它的阶段 C 的表现，或者是这里可能会出现一个叫做弱势信号这个时候的表现。
The way how
Sorry, go ahead.
The way how we see that volatility has increased is being shown to us in the spread, that if we would compare this spread to any of the spreads that we've seen to the downside after phase A, we could see how that spread has increased.
我们说这段时间它的振幅增大，是我们跟前一段时间它划线的这部分它的下降阶段的价差相比，它的价差增大了。
And that potentially identifies a different phase, different from B. So therefore, one of the scenarios that we're looking at here is a potential shakeout, which belongs actually to this smaller range right here. And this is another concept that I'll talk just in a second.
那么我们看到这个振幅增大或者是价差增大的时候，我们就知道，这一段和别的地方不一样了。它有可能是这个情景之一啊，它要讲几个情景。情景之一，这有可能是震仓，这有可能是吸筹阶段的震仓，也就是在这个小的阶段内。那么以后呢，它会再谈这个小的区域和大区域的这个概念。
This concept is called a principle within a principle. And the first time I heard about this was from my teacher and mentor, Henk Pruden. Henk Pruden was a professor at Golden Gate University, and my original knowledge on Wyckoff method all came from him. So he would say that within the larger trading range, we have quite a few smaller trading ranges, a principle within the principle. There is a small trading range right here on the border of phase A and phase B, which acts as a small accumulation, and that drives the price up. Then there is a small range right here, which is a distribution range, which drives the price down. And then if we look at the large range, and then we would look into the latest action from October of 2016, we would see that there is a much larger trading range and there is a smaller trading range.
那么他讲了一个新的概念呢，就是这可能叫做现象循环，也就是说，在一个大的交易区间内，它套有很多小的交易区间。刚才他给大家看了这个24测试附近，那是他画圈的那个交易区间，那是一个吸筹区间。经过吸筹以后，然后价格上涨以后，到了2016年 10月左右的时候，让它有一个派发区间。经过派发区间以后呢，这个股市开始下跌，也就是这个区间是大区间套小区间。
Within the small trading range, we would have the same principles as within the large trading range. We would have phase A, as we have phase A in the larger range. It would identify the stop in action to continue to the downside and the retest of the previous high. We would have phase B, which would have somewhat of a different behavior and somewhat of a different volume behavior as well. As the price tries to leave the trading range, we would say that there is a potential phase C, and it could coincide with a much larger phase C of the much larger trading range.
在这个小的交易区间，它的阶段构成或者是它的特性都和大的交易区间的比较相似。比方说，在这个小的交易区间，它也有终止行为，也有这个抛售狂潮，然后呢导致终止行为，然后开始价格上升。这个价格上升开始测试前期的这个高点，看能不能到达这个高点。也就是这个小的交易区间，它也会有阶段 A、B、C。和大的交易期间就有 A、B、C 一样。有的时候呢，如果是价格离开了这个小的交易期间以后的时候，我们说这有可能是阶段 C。这个阶段 C 小的交易期间的阶段 C 有可能和大区间的阶段 C 是吻合的。
Now, even though as scenario number one, I'm putting here a shakeout in the accumulation range, and by that we see that the price commits to the downside below this area of the support. We definitely see a lot of signs that are weak signs. This could be a lower high, another lower high relative to the previous high, and relative to the previous high in phase A, another lower high. Currently, this also would be considered a lower high. Also, another element of weakness is that the price did break the support, so this acts like a sign of weakness. So therefore, we should be discussing both of the scenarios right here, and we should be looking for some kind of confirmation in the price and volume action as to one way or another, whatever bias it is, whether it's a bullish bias or a bearish bias.
刚才讲到，如果这个吸筹区间的正仓，也就是最后点，如果它是正仓是一种情况，但是呢，与此同时，我们要看到另一种可能，也就是这个正仓行为它跌破了这个小区间的支撑线，而且呢，我们看到另外一些个虚弱这个股市市场虚弱的表现。比方说，在这个2016年的年底的时候，它这个点是比就是大的区间的自动上涨那个高点要低。然后大家可以看到，在2017年早期和就是说这个3月份和在11月份的这个高点的时候，它都比前期造成是lower high， 也就是说它的高点要比前期要低。最后咱们2018年3月份出现的这个高点也比前期的高点要低，这些都是一些虚弱的表现。所以说我们需要股市继续发展，我们要看到这两种情况的确认到底是哪一种情况。
Let's look at the short-term picture because it's going to give us a little bit better picture and more clues as to what is happening.
那么我们看一看这个深证指数的日线图，也许这个近期的日线图会给我们许多比较详尽的信息。
Please note that my trend lines here are somewhat different. I have left horizontal trend lines of the resistance and the support for the latest trading range in 2017, but I also have put downsloping trend lines, and I will explain why I did this.
大家可能看到了，在这个日线图上，我画的趋势线 和上一张图有点不一样。那么这个水平趋势线我上一张图已经画了，那也就是说这个是水平的。那么在这张图上呢，我还画了向下的这个趋势线。
The idea about upsloping or downsloping trading ranges comes from the linear regression channel. A linear regression channel usually addresses the deviation of the price above and below the mean. So if we would look at this price movement on the way up, we probably would notice that somewhere in the middle right here, there is this linear mean that shows the average price of the movement to the upside in the subtrend. So we see how this price action is upsloping in this channel.
那么这个向上或向下的这个通道的画法，它是根据线性回归的理论来画的。也就是大家如果看从前面那个2016年这个向上的通道来看的话，如果我们向上画一个通道的话，那么再画一条中间线，那么这个就是根据这个，这就是直线回归的理论，也就是说中间那条线代表着股价运动的平均值，也就是股价它是围绕这个平均值来运动的，所以说它形成了这个向上的通道。
The same happens with this trading range, where we have a downsloping range.
也就2017年以后，我们画的是一个向下的交易区间、交易通道。
And the price deviates around the mean that was created by this downsloping channel.
那么股价呢，它围绕的是下降通道的平均值来运动的。
Please notice that it's important that the majority, if not all of our points of support and points of resistance would reside around the support and resistance lines in this type of channels.
请大家看到，除了少数例外的时候，那么大多数的时候，这个股价的两边的值都坐落在这个通道的支撑线或者是它上限，也就是说压力线上面。
Usually when this happens and when you build this type of trend channels, that usually will tell you that you're correct in identification of your potential range in price action.
当这个股价这样表现，而且我们画出了通道趋势线的时候，基本上我们就可以确定这个股票运动的交易区间在哪里。
Well, let's look now at this latest trading range right here. We start with the climactic action. This is the highest point. And then we go into a very well-defined change of character. During this change of character, we see how the distance of a reaction has increased relative to anything that we've seen before on the move to the upside. And change of character would define the automatic reaction to us, which will be followed later by a secondary test, which is an attempt to retest the high of the climactic action.
那么我们现在呢，看一段最近的这段交易区间。最近交易区间起始点是这个抢购高潮，这个 BC 抢购高潮这个点。这个点完以后，就出现了股价的下跌。这个下跌的到了自动下跌这个点。而这个中间的阶段，我们把它叫做特性改变。为什么叫特性改变呢？就是说这一段下跌的距离要比前一段时间任何一次下跌，股市下跌的距离都大。
Later on.
Sorry, let me add a few sentences.
Okay, sure.
自动下跌完以后，会出现了二次测试。二次测试是向上的一段时间，上涨的一段时间。这个二次测试的点，就是测试的是什么呢？测试抢购高潮这个价格水平。
look at the secondary test that concludes phase A. And those are the elements in phase A: buying climax, automatic reaction, secondary test. The secondary test comes at a lower level than the buying climax. We would have to rally to this high right here to produce the same type of the price travel as we had from buying climax to the automatic reaction. It also comes and stops at the area where there is a lot of selling that has happened. And usually that type of selling is going to be associated with institutional selling. So there is some kind of resistance for the price to continue its move to the upside. And we see how the spread is starting to increase in this area, suggesting that the selling is going to continue. So this inherently is showing us weakness, structural weakness, that should lead to further down prices.
我们看到这个二次测试，二次测试呢，它是阶段 A 的最后一个事件。这个张图上的二次测试，它不到前期高点，也就是不到那个抢购高潮那个价位水平，它只是到了接近的那个水平。而且我们看到二次测试它对应的是什么？对应是前期股价迅速下降的那个时间段。而且这个下降时间段呢，它的一个特征表现就是说价差增大。这一张 K 线的时候的价差非常大，而且对应的是成交量的增高。经常这是大机构卖出的表现。那么从二次测试以后，我们看到后边这个 K 线，这个 K 线也出现了一个价差增大。经常这种表现是弱势表现，或者是说它代表的股价有可能会进一步下跌。
And the price does follow the move to the downside, but with a different character. When we look into the price and volume in this area, we could see that the volume is starting to go down and the spread is also decreasing. So we have a situation where the price does go down, but effort is decreasing as well as the result.
那么这个股价呢，确实在这二次测试以后下跌了。但是我们也可以看到，大家仔细看的话，看到这个下跌的这个 K 线的特点和以前有点不太一样了。首先，它的价差比原来的价差减少了。第二呢，它的成交量也减少了。这里也就是说，努力，如果大家知道魏克夫三大定律的话，那就是努力减少了，结果也减少了。
This suggests some kind of short-term bullish action, which could bring us to a stop in action, reversal, change of character around the area of the support. And that's exactly what happens. It takes a little bit more time. And as I mentioned, a principle within the principle, look at this trading range that has this its own phase A, sign of weakness in phase B, upthrust in phase B, attempt to shake out the price below the trading range in phase C, and then subsequent move to the upside.
大家看到，当努力减小，结果也减少的时候，那么这里面就出现了一个牛气，也就是在阶段 B 里面出现了一个牛气。大家还记得刚才他谈到的一个概念，也就是小区间、大区间内套小区间，也就是在这里面他画了一个小区间。在小区间的时候，大家可以看到，也包括阶段 A、阶段 B、阶段 C、阶段 D， 那么也包括在阶段 A 它也有这个停止行为，到阶段 B 的时候，它有一个叫做阶段 B 的弱势信号，然后再上升完以后，它有一个震仓，震完仓以后，在阶段 C 有个震仓，震仓完以后，然后股价继续上涨。
The rally should answer one important question for us. Does it have enough strength to overcome the previous high at the point of the secondary test in phase A? If it cannot do this, then it's going to show more weakness and most likely the price will go down.
这段上涨呢，它也将回答我们一个问题，也就是说这个上涨的强度，这个力量 能不能突破二次测试那个高度？如果是不能突破的话，那么也就是这次企图，它这次这个市场比较弱，它有可能股价会继续下跌。
Even on the way up, as the price goes up and we look at the reactions, and therefore we look at the levels of the supply, and we compare it to the reactions on the way up on the previous rally in phase A, secondary test rally, we see that supply is more present here. And even visualizing the levels of supply on the way up in phase A compared to the same levels or the same type of reactions that we've seen in phase B, we see that supply signature has increased. The result of that effort also has increased, and we probably would be expecting that the rally is going to fail.
即使是在这段上升的过程中，我们可以看到很多端倪，也就是在这段上升过程中，它有很多调整，也就是向下调整的情况，而跟阶段 A 的那个上升的向下调整的这个情况相比，我们可以看到成交量比以前增高了，而且向下调整的幅度比以前增大了。从这一点我们就可以看到，那么这个有可能我们不会突破前期的高点。
The only thing that we need to do at that point is to identify how it's going to fail. We are going to see a trading range here as well, which is going to have its own phases. Phase C is the final phase in the distribution. Phase A, phase B, all of these phases are going to be present. So the concepts are going to be the same. We're going to see a sign of weakness as an attempt to commit to the downside, the last attempt to rally as a last point of supply. And then as the price goes down and stops again, we will have a redistribution. And if you guys remember at the top of this session, we talked about a stepping stone trading range. So this stepping stone trading range is going to be a redistribution that is also going to have the same type of labeling that we've done before. All of the phases are going to have conceptually the same characteristics.
刚才我们谈到那段上升阶段，它的这个动力虚弱，不能够突破前期高点。那么如何观察仔细研究这段这个情况呢？那么我们就是说，在这段上升的最后，我们也可以画出一个交易区间，大家也可以分出它的阶段 A、B、C、D。那么和大家以前大家可能记住他以前谈的概念，也就是在大的交易区间内套小的交易区间，每一个这个交易区间，它的特性，它的这个划分阶段都是一样的，都是划成 A、B， 可以划分成 A、B、C、D。那么我们可以看到这块有阶段 C 它的这个测试，然后呢向下变成弱势信号，弱势信号以后呢向上再跳起一下，变成了 FPSY， 也就是最后派发点，最后供应点，供应点以后呢虚弱，就开始股市下跌，跌到一个程度，然后呢又形成了一个再派发的区间，也就是这个区间呢，也就是大家所说的脚踏实交易区间。这个脚踏实交易区间再派发区间也可以划分成它的阶段 A、B、C、D， 所以说大区间内套小区间都是一样的。
Now let's look at the last move to the downside. It's very interesting and a couple of observations right here. First of all, it's weaker than Shanghai Composite. That's number one.
我们研究一下，看一下这个最近的下跌情况，非常有趣。首先呢，它这个下跌的情况，这个跌的点比上证指数下跌的点要弱，也就是下跌它的情况比较弱。
Secondly, the structure of the move to the downside in this particular phase reminds me of the original move to the downside that we have had in phase A.
那么这个下跌的结构呢，也跟在阶段 A 的这个结构比较相似。
So this could act as analogs to each other, and we could, by our observation, make some kind of deductions as to what can potentially should happen next.
我们可以把这两个这个下降的情况，这个结构进行相提并论来比较。
And number 3 is that look at the volatility that we have had on the reactions in phase B and compare that to, let's say, the last leg in the potential phase C or phase D and the volatility that we had in phase A. So we see how volatility increases in phase A, then volatility decreases, suggesting some kind of rally. And now volatility has increased again.
我们也把这段的振幅，也就是下跌情况，和前一段时间在阶段 A 和阶段 B 初期发生的那段下跌，它的振幅和下跌情况特点进行分析。那么在阶段 A 的时候，那么它的振幅是增加的。那么阶段 B 的时候呢，它振幅就下跌的幅度反倒小了，那么预示着它有可能会有一段上升。那么到阶段 C 的时候，我们看到这个振幅和这个下跌情况幅度又增加了。
Now, as volatility increases on the last leg to the downside, we are expecting that the result will follow. But let's just observe what kind of result do we have on the way to the downside. We definitely had a lower low below the low of the automatic reaction in phase B. And our progression is slightly more to the downside, but it's not very significant. We're really not making this type of progress to the downside that we've made in phase A. Also, what's interesting is that the low on this move to the downside relative to the previous stop in action in 2015 is actually making a higher low. So in a way, result, even though has some commitment to the downside on a short-term basis, so short-term result is actually increasing and being more bearish, the long-term result is actually showing us inability to go lower and creating the new lower low on the long-term basis, which is inherently bullish.
那么我们看到在振幅它增加的时候，我们也要知道，可能会结果会跟随。那么我比较一下这几次的结果。那么这次呢，它确实出现了跟前一段时间跟这个小的交易期间，这个阶段 A 和阶段 B 来比的话，它确实出现了水平上的低底，也就是它比阶段 A 那个自动下跌点和阶段 B 的弱势信号点，的底都低。但是呢，与此同时呢，我们却要看到它和阶段 A 的比，那么中间的停顿的话，和就是前期低点比，那个阶段 A 的时候，它比前期低点要下降的幅度基本相等，下降很大。而这个呢，和阶段 B 的前期低点比，我们没有下降相等的幅度，也就是没有下降的那个距离那么大，这是一个情况。另外呢，从这个低点我们要比和2015年的时候创造那个低点来比的话，它不到2015年前面那个低点，也就是它形成的是一个高底。这个时候呢，它却有一点比较牛的这个姿态。
And that's the biggest dilemma that we have. And usually traders and students are going to have a problem here just because of different time frames are showing us different type of bias. So to be correct in our analysis here, we need to seek some kind of confirmation for one scenario over another. For the scenario of the possible accumulation over the scenario of possible distribution.
从这里呢，我们得出了一个看出来这有点自相矛盾，也就是短期的观察和长期的观察是矛盾的。短期的我们可以看有点熊的气息，但长期的呢，却它有点牛的气息。所以说我们需要股价进一步发展来给我们一个确认，到底是哪一种情况。
If we look at the bullish scenario and we would start thinking that this was just a sprint or a shakeout, we want to see some kind of progression to the upside and return it back into the trading range. So as we look at the horizontal range, we could see that the price indeed come back into the range. But look at where it stops. It stops at about 1/2 of the range height.
Okay, Ramon, you say this is a bullish scenario, right?
Yes. So
Okay.
looking for the confirmation of the bullish scenario, we see the rally here. But as we look at the horizontal range, we see how the price stops at 1/2 of the range.
OK， 如果我们看这是一个比较牛的情况的话，那么我们就知道这儿要么是正仓，要么是弹簧效应，那么这个股价会回到交易区间内，它确实也回去了。如果回去的这个倾斜的，如果是向下这个通道内，它确实回去了，而且呢到达那个点。如果说我们按照水平交易区间的话，那么我才发现它到达了水平交易区间的1/2处。
I also like for the bullish scenario how the volume signature increases as the price progresses to the upside, and the spread increases relative to the rally that we have had in this area right here in phase B. There is a lot of gap in action, which suggests that there is some kind of urgency by institutions to get into the position. So all of those and the way how the price came back into the trading range have some bullish characteristics.
他也比较稍喜欢认为这是一个比较倾向于牛市的这个特点。因为什么呢？因为大家看到在这个成交量上，也就是在上升的过程中，成交量是增高的。另外呢，它的价差，就是这个 K 线的价差，比前一段时间在向上走的时候，这个价差要增大。还有一个，大家可以看到，在这个上升的过程中，有很多跳空上升，这都是牛市的表现。
Yet, as I mentioned before, if we look at the downsloping range, the price just reached the level of the resistance, where we usually would have some kind of selling that would put the price down. And you can see it from different spots here on this chart that every time it comes to that sloping resistance, we have some kind of selling. So short term, we could anticipate some kind of move to the downside as a potential test of the previous low. And we already could see how the character of this reaction is starting to change relative to everything what we've seen on the way up. And we see how the supply is increasing as well. So we have effort increase, we have a result increase, which is short-term bearish, and we most likely are going to go into some kind of testing action.
如果大家看到这个向下倾斜的这个通道的情况，或者是交易区间的情况下，每一次股价上升到就是这个向下倾斜的通道的上缘的时候，都会有供应，都会有卖单出现，而大量的卖单把股价又砸下来。所以说现在呢，我们又到了这个上缘的阻力区。到了上缘阻力区以后，大家可以看到这个表现，它现在的这个 K 线的表现和我们本次上升的每一次的下降不一样了，下降幅度大，有可能 K 线也增大。所以说这就说明了什么呢？这就说明努力增大了，结果也增大了。所以短期来说有一点点熊市，就是短期来说熊的气息。我们可以看到在这段时间成交量也增大了。
So the two scenarios that we look at is to have some kind of reaction and then another attempt to go up. And we want to see how that's going to materialize. Is it going to create a lower high, or is it going to overcome the previous high? And if it's going to fail, then is it going to fail below the low of the test? And here is our two tactical scenarios. One is overcoming the high that was created by this rally. And then the second scenario is just a failure. And sometimes we are going to be in those positions where it's going to be hard to define what kind of bias we have currently. So you have to be very tactical as to how you make money at this spot.
我们刚才提到了，那么这个股价到达这个下降通道的这个上缘的时候，会有一些个下跌，而且呢，这个下跌我们认为它这次是对这个底缘这个底点的测试，而目前的股市发展呢，有可能会出现几种情况。第一种呢，是它在下跌到一定程度的时候，它再继续上攻，在测试上面。测试上面呢，有两种可能出现，一个是突破前期高点，也就是突破这次上升的前期高点，继续往上走。另外一个呢，就是不到那儿这次上升的前期高点，而也就是说这次向上走失败了，往下跌，有可能会跌破这次就是停止的那个低点。所以说，作为一个交易者来说，我们要在这儿非常注意，非常的使用我们的这个技术来赚钱。
So as we seek for the confirmation, another strategic idea for us at this point of time, and this is obviously very relevant for the Chinese markets where you don't have the ability to short, you only have the ability to buy and sell, is as we go through this testing action, we need to seek leadership. We need to identify the sectors, industry groups, and the particular stocks that are behaving much, much better on the rally itself and on the subsequent test. There's going to be some other requirements as well, like a good trading range with the built-in causality in it, and we'll talk about this later on. But for the next session, for the next video, we're going to look at some of these sectors to identify where is the leadership right now. And I think it's going to be very crucial for us to identify that as we seek the confirmation from the general markets to the overall direction of the next move.
那么我们目前的策略是什么呢？第一，我们要等待，要去看，要寻找这个确认，就是对于哪一种情况，也是刚才我们谈到的情况一、情况二，对哪种情况它是确认的，究竟是哪种情况。第二种呢，我们与此同时要寻找领涨股票、领涨行业，也就是在这个以后呢，尤其是在中国市场来说，我们不能做空，我们只能做多。在这个时候，寻找领涨的股票和行业是非常重要。
And that's it for today. In the next session, as I mentioned, we're gonna go more into the definitions of the accumulation and the distribution. There is still a lot of material to cover there, and by material I mean basic material. And then we'll look at into sectors, and we'll try to identify some of the sectors that would be of interest to us.
下次视频呢，我们将详细讨论吸筹区间的事件及其特点，而且呢，我们还要讨论看一下中国股市的行业指数。
We are very grateful that you've been watching this recording. Thank you so much for joining us for this session. If you have any comments or questions, please email us at wyckoftrading@hotmail.com and sign up for our YouTube channel to watch other videos that are going to be coming up within the next weeks.
非常感谢大家观看我们的视频，非常感谢大家给我们回馈，给我们信息。如果方便的话，你也可以关注我们的视频，我们将每周继续和大家更新。
Again, thank you so much, Govind, for your translation, and thank you everyone. We'll see you next week.
谢谢国本的翻译，谢谢大家，下周再见。
拜拜。